I'm Sheldon Neal, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. There were over 7,600 new confirmed COVID-19 cases reported nationwide yesterday, bringing the total of cases to more than 1,060,000. There were 28 new reported deaths, boosting Canada's death toll to 23,315. Ontario reported its highest new case count with a record 4,400. Quebec reported the next highest number of new infections with over 1,500. Alberta had nearly 1,200. No new cases were reported any of the three territories, PEI or Newfoundland and Labrador. The pace of vaccine deliveries to Canada is expected to slow a bit in the week ahead, with only 1 million shots scheduled to arrive over the next 7 days. More than 797,000 people, or 2.1% of the population, have been fully vaccinated. More than 10.6 million doses of vaccine have been delivered to the provinces so far. The rush to get vaccines into Canadian arms has grown more urgent amid a continued surge in the number of new COVID infections. The country's leading physician says there continues to be a concerning rise in cases of COVID-19 variants. Dr. Teresa Tam says national ICU admissions increased by 23% over the last 7 days compared to the week before. She adds the spike is putting a strain on the country's healthcare system. Dr. Tam says Canada is nearing the peak of the current wave of the pandemic. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says the Liberals have failed in their response to COVID-19. The New Democrats ended their problem-plagued 3-day policy convention with an attack on the Liberals. Computer glitches, delays, and accusations overshadowed much of the first 2 days of their virtual meeting. Mr. Singh delivered a message of fair treatment, financial relief, while pointing to Liberal shortcomings on pandemic response and wealth distribution. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau delivered a keynote address over the weekend to end the party's first ever virtual national convention. During his campaign-like speech, the Prime Minister highlighted his government's achievements on tough issues like COVID-19 vaccines. He boasted his team has done more and far more than the Conservative prediction. It would take years to get vaccines for COVID-19. Aaron O'Toole is assuring Conservative supporters he never hid who he was in his bid to secure the party leadership.
I didn't hide who I was when I was running for leader. I've always voted in terms of human rights protections for LGBTQ Canadians, for women. I've always compared it to me serving in the military. I've served alongside some exceptional people, and I'm here to support their rights 100% and to make their lives more prosperous. I'm not here to divide. I didn't hide any of that. I inspected and worked in and around pipelines and oil. I'm very, very much a supporter of our energy sector.
Mr. O'Toole says the, quote, true blue campaign he ran to secure the party leadership reflects his true colors. Mr. O'Toole was speaking during a question and answer session with journalist Brian Lilly at the Canada Strong and Free network hosted by the News Forum. The theme of the conference was Build Back Right. Russia wants a bigger claim to what lies on the Arctic Ocean floor. The country recently filed documents with the United Nations to expand its claim to the Arctic Ocean seabed and anything below it. Arctic security and defense analyst Robert Hubert says Russia's new submission gets as close to Canada's exclusive economic zone as legally possible. The UN still has to review the submission, but if approved, it would give Russia exclusive rights to potential resources in parts of the Arctic Ocean's soil and subsoil. Hundreds of people gathered outside an Alberta church that has been charged with refusing to follow COVID-19 health rules. Some tore down fences Alberta Health Services had erected last week around Grace Life Church west of Edmonton, but the RCMP immediately put them back up. Those who gathered to protest pandemic restrictions sang hymns and prayed for the church to reopen as dozens of police kept watch. The church released a statement last night saying their members were not at the protest. Muslims in Canada and around the world are navigating COVID public health regulations for their second Ramadan in the shadow of the pandemic. This year, Ramadan comes amid an intense new coronavirus wave. Islam's holiest month is a time of fasting, charity, and worship, but also for group prayers and gatherings of family and friends for festive communal meals at the end of the daily fast. More stories coming up after the break on the Forum Daily Weekend Review. Stay right here with us. Efforts are underway to get the United States back into the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. All eyes were recently on Vienna, where envoys from Russia, China, Germany, France, Britain, and Iran met. The United States has said it is conducting indirect talks with Iran. The talks revolve around getting the U.S. to rejoin the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action after it withdrew under the Trump administration. In exchange for accepting some limitations to its nuclear development program, Iran would see U.S. sanctions eased or lifted. Here to help us unpack it all is Dr. Avi Ben-Lolo, award-winning and noted expert in the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, genocide, human rights, and Israel. Welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much for having me.
You say the United States will leave Israel with the short end of the stick with the Iran nuclear deal. What do you mean?
Well, if the 2015 JCPOA agreement is any indication, Israel will be left defending the Middle East after the Western powers reach an agreement. Israel has to defend itself against encroaching Iranian bases in Syria primarily. Iran has been able to build a network of bases, terror proxies, and arm them. As a result of, and this is primarily, as we know, as a result of the $1.7 billion, that's $1.7 billion cash infusion from America, and of course, the no sanctions. While the Europeans benefit from business deals with Iran, Israel has to defend them, essentially.
Why is Iran supportive of the United States wanting to come back to the table?
Well, and that's, it's a good question, Sheldon, because Iran wants basically to resume global trade. Iran has been stifled under the Trump administration and really not able to conduct its affairs. It wants credibility. It wants to really conduct business affairs so it can grow in its economic strength, in its theological and ideological strength, and it wants really the entire enchilada to have money, to have the resources, to have the influence. But at the same time, I think it's very important to say that it wants all of those things while continuing to misbehave and destabilize the world, I would say.
How does the United States benefit from returning to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action?
Yeah, and that's really the million-dollar question, because the benefit is very hard to see, because there's just really no apparent good benefit, if you ask me. It's really based on a skewed worldview. At this point, it appears that what the Biden administration is trying to do is really unravel and undo anything that Trump did, including foreign policy. And the Biden administration, of course, believes that a deal with Iran, or at least it says it believes, that a deal with Iran will stop nuclear production. But we know that this is, of course, not the case.
Western JCPOA partners have been shutting the door, some would say, on both Israel and the Gulf states from negotiations. Why is that, and what might the consequences be?
You know what? Simply because they know they're wrong. It's really as simple as that. They know that Israel and the Gulf states totally oppose the JCPOA. So something is clearly wrong here. If you're having countries that stand the most to either benefit or lose from an agreement, who have really the most at stake, this shows that the JCPOA partners by leaving out Israel and the Gulf states, they're really acting on their own volition without any kind of legitimacy in the region. And if you really think about it, this kind of behavior actually is going to destabilize the region even more and
Yes.
possibly lead to war, because if none of the people who live there,
Yes.
Israel, Gulf states, including UAE, Bahrain, Morocco,
Yes.
Saudi Arabia, if they're not part of the JCPOA, they may align with one another, and in fact
Yes.
have to go to war against Iran.
I got 30 seconds for this, or about almost less than 30. What is the best strategy going forward in your view?
Well, the best strategy is very simple. Include these nations that I just mentioned into the negotiations. Listen to what it is that Israel is saying, because Israel is the most threatened country by Iran. Iran, as we know, is a hostile, anti-Semitic
Yes.
regime that has denied the Holocaust, that
Yes.
has said that it wants to wipe Israel off the map. So you need to include Israel and show that America and Israel are completely and unequivocally aligned with one another.
According to a report last year, due to the pandemic, many Canadians are passing over proactive cancer screening or diagnosis of potential cancers. This leaves many doctors to believe an increase in advanced tumors and deaths is on the horizon. According to the Quebec Health Ministry, more than 4,000 people who normally get diagnosed last year went undiagnosed. In Ontario, the health minister announced this week the province will add hundreds of critical care beds as COVID-19 infections soar. In the meantime, hospitals have been instructed to cancel elective surgeries except in, quote, absolutely life and death cases. The potential lack of ICU beds due to COVID-19 is causing concerns for those facing other serious illnesses. Here to help us unpack it all is Dr. Abhishek Rout, Medical Director with the Appletree Medical Group. He joins me now. Welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks so much, Sheldon.
Pre-screening of patients with no symptoms and diagnosis of people thought to possibly have cancer dropped when the pandemic began. What could account for this?
I think this is a great question and a great topic. The preventative health is really affected by quite a few different variables. Age, for example, younger adults tend not to seek preventative health screenings. Health of the patient in general, comorbidities can certainly interfere with that, and accessibility of the healthcare provider. We as physicians, we always push for preventative screenings because it's not very often that a patient would want to do those screenings. It's usually the doctor who recommends them while they're likely there for something else. And this was, of course, all pre-COVID with these challenges. COVID has, of course, added a whole nother dimension, as you correctly mentioned as well, a very different dynamic where the patient at this point was supposed to stay home as much as possible to minimize risk and perhaps not seek out healthcare when they need it there.
Prostate cancer particularly took a dive with fewer biopsies. What would make prostate cancer stand out in your thoughts?
If we look at the screening steps for a lot of different cancers, you see the imaging can be pretty good. For instance, mammograms, breast ultrasounds are helpful in determining risk. For prostate imaging, it's not that helpful, actually. We rely on a digital rectal examination and a PSA blood test, both of which, again, are not that great. And so even then, once we have a patient in one of those flags, we have to then send them to a biopsy. So prostate cancer is a bit unique where there's so many stages to actually getting properly screened that it turns out to be quite a barrier and likely would be the reason why it's so low here.
Some experts say restrictions by the healthcare system itself is one of the reasons for the decline in diagnosis. What healthcare restrictions currently exist in the healthcare system that could be causing the decline?
I think it's an evolving area. In mid-March of last year, Ontario had actually put screening programs like breast, cervical, and colorectal cancers on hold. And that was just in an effort to pool all the available resources to deal with the pandemic. This is not something that's new to Ontario, so that was certainly a large barrier. The second barrier, of course, is, and the biggest one, is we do have limited resources. Every physician, every hospital bed, every surgery plays a monumental role in healthcare, but all of those need to be redirected.
So if we're talking solutions now, testing numbers are beginning to return to better levels, but certain cancer screenings are still low. How do we fix this?
I think what you're doing right now is absolutely what we need. We need people to know the importance of screenings and put that as an important topic for them. And we need people to understand that their doctor's offices are open and they can see them virtually or in person for those screenings.
What are the long-term concerns over the possible delays in elective surgeries and restrictions due to hospital capacity?
So if we look at just 2020 numbers, we would say that about 44,000 men in Canada would have died from any sort of cancer, and about 39,000 women. What that means is, on average, we have about 617 Canadians that would be diagnosed with cancer every day. And on average, we have about 228 Canadians who would die from cancer every day. So my concern with this is if we really don't reprioritize screenings, those numbers are going to go way up.
I have about 25 seconds for this. Overall, people need to get comfortable with going back to their doctor to get the health issues checked out, etc. 20 seconds for this. What's your advice moving forward?
I would absolutely agree with that statement. Everyone should take 5 minutes today to call your family doctor's practices or book online to get a preventative screening checkup. I think this will be the best and most valuable 5 minutes you'd spend.
Thank you so much for those insights. Definitely appreciate it. Thank you again. Don't go away. Our international segment is coming up after the break with top stories and headlines from around the world from this past week. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more to come on the Forum Daily Week in Review. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is making an unannounced visit to Afghanistan to sell Afghan leaders and wary public on President Joe Biden's decision to withdraw all American troops from the country.
I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home. The United States will begin our final withdrawal, begin it on May 1 of this year. We'll not conduct a hasty rush to the exit. We'll do it responsibly, deliberately, and safely. And we will do it in full coordination with our allies and partners who now have more forces in Afghanistan than we do. And the Taliban should know that if they attack us as we draw down, we will defend ourselves and our partners with all the tools at our disposal.
NATO has said its roughly 7,000 non-American forces in Afghanistan would also be departing within a few months. The Biden administration is preparing to announce new sanctions today in response to a massive Russian hacking campaign that breached vital federal agencies as well as for election interference. The sanctions would represent the first retaliatory action announced against the Kremlin for last year's hack, known as the SolarWinds breach. Beijing's top official in Hong Kong is warning foreign forces not to interfere with the national security in the city, threatening retaliation amid tensions between China and Western powers. The U.S., Britain, and their allies have condemned China's tightening control over Hong Kong's freedoms. The director of the central government's liaison office says everyone in Hong Kong needs to respect the legal responsibility of upholding national security in the city. Two top officials of Japan's ruling LDP party suggested separately the Tokyo Olympics could still be in for some radical changes. One said they could be canceled, and the other said if they do proceed, it might be without any fans. The speculation comes as coronavirus cases rise across Japan, and just a day after Tokyo reached the 100 days to go mark in the COVID postponed games. Last month, organizers banned fans from abroad. A senior U.S. official has warned Lebanese politicians who continue to block reforms in the crisis-hit country could face punitive actions by Washington and its allies. U.S. Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs David Hale did not provide details on the nature of the potential actions, but he appeared to refer to reports the U.S. and its allies may impose sanctions on Lebanese politicians in order to force them to end a months-long political deadlock. A Saudi university near the border with Yemen caught fire after the kingdom's air defenses intercepted a barrage of ballistic missiles and bomb-laden drones. The Saudi-led coalition at war in Yemen said the interception of the missiles and the drones early Thursday scattered debris on Jizan University's campus, which caused a fire that has been contained. It blamed the Iran-backed Houthi group for the attack. Turkey's defense ministry says rockets targeting a Turkish military base in northern Iraq have killed one soldier and wounded a child in a nearby village. The ministry said in a statement 3 rockets were launched toward the base in northern Iraq's Bashika region late on Wednesday. The assault on Bashika came as a drone attack targeted U.S.-led coalition forces near a northern Iraqi airport, causing a fire that damaged a building. There were no casualties. A new study says leaving middle seats open could give airline passengers more protection from COVID-19. Researchers say the risk of passengers being exposed to the virus from an infected person on the plane could be cut anywhere between 23% to 57% if middle seats are empty compared to a full flight. The study released yesterday supports moves by airlines to limit seating early in the pandemic. An Australian man got a scary surprise from the lettuce he brought home from a Sydney grocery store. Alex White says he thought he was seeing a huge worm writhing in the plastic-wrapped lettuce until a snake tongue flickered. Authorities say a venomous pale-headed snake made the nearly 900-kilometer journey to Sydney from a Toowoomba packing plant wrapped with the lettuce. The supermarket is investigating how the dangerous reptile found its way in. I'm Sheldon Neal, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news from this past week. Thanks for joining us on the Forum Daily Week in Review, and we'll see you again next time. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye for now.